I'd like to welcome everyone to the session Classrooms as Communities with Joel Seaman. It's always wonderful to have people joining us from all over Ontario in these professional development sessions from OTF Connects. We're excited to have Joel with us to present to his peers, and thank you for everyone who is participating online and watching the recording. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel. Are you ready?
I am. Hello, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to thank you all for coming here tonight. I'm very much looking forward to the learning we're going to experience together. I also want to thank Molly at OTF Connects for moderating tonight, for helping me out with all the technology. I appreciate it. This is my second time leading a webinar for OTF. I had a fabulous experience last time, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight. Everyone in the chat, just let me know if you can hear me. Just then I don't have to worry. Can you hear me? Jenny says it sounds good. Yes, yes, yes. All right, thank you very much. Before we get started on our topic, Classroom as Communities, I thought I would take a quick second to introduce myself, to provide a little bit of context for the learning we're going to have tonight. As Molly said, my name is Joel Seaman, and I teach with the Toronto District School Board. I've been teaching for 6 years, and during that time, I've had the pleasure of being in kindergarten the whole time, and I really do mean the pleasure. I love kindergarten, and judging by your roles that I saw in the chat, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure we all would agree that kindergarten is a fabulous, inspiring, fun, and rewarding place to be. I teach kindergarten at the school on Toronto Island, and whenever I do bring that up in my presentations, sometimes I don't even get as many questions about the topic, but more questions about the island. So I will let you know right off the bat, yes, we do take a boat to work, to and from school, year-round, so we are very thankful now that the snow seems to be melting a little bit. We had a nice sunny boat ride today. So that is me, and tonight we are going to be talking about Classroom as Communities. I do want to quickly say, and I like to say this at the start of all my presentations, I am in no way claiming to be an expert on this topic. And in fact, I feel very strongly that there is no such thing as an expert in education. For me, that's one of the things that is so exciting about our field. There's always more to learn, more things to consider, new perspectives to take, and as we know, every year with new students, you may see things in a different way. I'm simply here tonight to talk about what has worked for me and in my practice. With that in mind, I do recognize that we are a room full of knowledge and experience, and it's my hope tonight that we hear from multiple voices throughout the evening. I certainly don't want to talk at you for an hour and a half, and I'm pretty sure you don't want that either. I always find that these sessions are much more meaningful when there's a dialogue. So I've built in some opportunities to hear from you, but please know that throughout the night I will be looking at the chat window. If you have any questions or things you'd like to add to the conversation, I would appreciate that. Thanks, Vanessa. I do like to start with a minds-on quote, and this is the one I had originally picked out, and I looked at a few others, and I kept coming back to this one. I think it's very simple, but really it says it all, and it's that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. To me, when I read this quote, it makes me think that in school, we all know there's so much to do and so much coming from above. We have to think about things like test scores and paperwork and reading levels. But what I really try to highlight in our practice is that underneath all of that is community, and a community that's built on relationships. And really investing in this strong community gives us a strong foundation to support all the learning that happens in our schools. I wanted to provide you with an outline for the learning tonight so we can kind of look ahead to what's coming. I figured if we're going to be talking about community, it would be important to start off with defining what is community, and it's important to hear from multiple voices in this. We're going to talk briefly about why community is important, why are we spending our time tonight thinking about it, and that will lead directly into the role of relationships. So we will be starting kind of theory-based off the top. It's going to be the most talky portion of the evening, but the big part we're going to get to are some practical strategies for building positive, proactive, and pleasant classroom communities You'll see some examples from our practice, again, things that have worked for me, but I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you and seeing some strategies that you've put into place to build classroom communities. There will be some wrap-up discussion questions at the end, and I will be sharing some resources that have been helpful for me on my learning journey. Starting off with the idea of what is a community, as Molly said, we are going to be using the text tool because I'm looking forward to hearing from you to get all our minds engaged. And the question that I'm posing is, what is your understanding of community, particularly in the context of early years learning environments? So when I flip to the next slide, you'll see that there's a large area here. If you can use that text tool to jot a word, a few words, a sentence, a paragraph, what is community to you in the early years? Candy says, anyone who has contact with a child, absolutely. It makes me think of Bronfenbrenner's rings, the ecological model, the school, the family, the larger community. I'm seeing lots of mentions of the word belonging. That's very, very interesting knowing our new kindergarten program. We're going to get to that. Someone has mentioned feeling safe. Yeah, I think that's super important in our learning communities. Sense of safety and support, mutual respect. I love that. The mutual respect piece is super important. Working together toward a common goal. I love that. That's super important. And this too, feeling safe and willing to take risks. Absolutely. A community kind of gives us that safety net. And I say us, both educators in the classroom and the students. Awesome. Thank you all for contributing. Like I said, it's a much more meaningful conversation when there's multiple voices and multiple perspectives, and I look forward to learning from you. Being able to rely on each other, I love that. For those still typing, I'm going to give about a minute and a half if you'd like to add your voice to the conversation. I just don't want to switch to the next slide when people are still taking part. Awesome. Really good thoughts. Thank you all for taking part. And I feel like you really have done the work here of defining what is a community in an early year setting. So thank you for all of this. I'm seeing pieces that are really going to emerge throughout the night. So that's exciting to know that we're all on the same page. When I was thinking about what community is, it seemed natural to turn to the dictionary. I found a few interesting things there. It defines community as a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, the fact that we're all in kindergarten. A feeling of fellowship with others, I like that, as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And I don't know about this last one, a group of interdependent organisms of different species growing or living together in a specified habitat. To further think about what community is and to hear from voices in the community, we actually asked our students what is the community, and I have some of their voice here to kind of give you their perspective. So community means that we work and play together. In a community, we help other people in need. We treat others nicely, and we listen to our brains so we can make good choices. Definitely, we're working on that. In our community, it's important to respect each other. That's kind of the root of it all. And this community belongs to us because we work together to take care of it. That ownership piece is going to emerge through the night. So that was students from our own community sharing with you what they feel community means. And lastly, I want to share with you what I think community is. So I sat down to kind of collect my thoughts on what I feel community is. And I think this in some ways is kind of the closest to a manifesto of my teaching that I've written. And it's that a classroom community provides equal voice to all involved, teachers, students, families. Each member's unique perspective is honored, valued, celebrated, and reflected in our space. As a learning community, the focus is not on arbitrary rules and discipline, but on co-created expectations, self-regulation, teamwork, mutual respect, and accountability. Community members are viewed as confident and capable and are able to gain independence in navigating social interactions with their fellow community members. Time is given to academic learning that occurs in schools, but equal time is given to building and maintaining these positive relationships. As a community, we talk about our feelings, and as often as we can, we dance, we play, and we laugh. To me, that's community in the early years. If anyone would like to respond in the chat, anything they would add, anything that resonated with them in this definition of what is community. Yeah, Shannon, accountability for sure. I've got a piece coming up in the practical example that touches on the idea of accountability, both for students and for teachers in the community. Tracy, dance, play, and laugh. Yes, every day we try. I think communities celebrate joy and they come together. Jenny L. Are you a Jenny L. who is a former colleague from the island, perhaps, or do you just have the same name as somebody I know? I had a feeling. Hi, Jenny. Co-created expectations. I think that's important as well. Because if we're calling ourselves a community, but it's the educators in the room who are setting all the expectations or the rules, it kind of goes against the idea of a community. Yes, Tracy, absolutely democratic. We all have a voice. And it's easy to say that, but it's important to remember that that's actually happening. Great point, Tara. Absolutely. Tara's saying she's not sure about the piece about time given to academic learning, that learning is happening all the time. And Tara, I would agree wholeheartedly with your statement. I think it's important to remember that we know as early years educators that the learning happens in the play. So when I say taking away time from academic learning, I'm thinking more about that rote, traditional, pencil and paper task work, the busy work that we sometimes see in older grades. But through the act of simply playing together, students are learning and building community at the same time. Thanks for pointing that out. Absolutely, Jenny. There's that balance, right? We're told about the reading levels, and we all hear it, and it's important, right? That's part of what we do. But to me, it's important to not sacrifice community building for the sake of getting other stuff done. It's got to be a balance. We're going to flip over to the next slide. And I simply ask, why is community important? Why is this the topic of conversation? And why, for those of us who have really delved in to the new kindergarten program, why is this such a prevalent part of what we're doing in kindergarten now in Ontario. And in my opinion, it's because the conversations about respect and responsibilities that tend to come with community really make our job as educators easier. When students have a vested interest and pride in caring for each other and for our space, it becomes less about telling the students what to do and more about everyone having a responsibility as a member of our community. And this can be a really proactive approach. And I gave the tidy up example. You know, none of us want to be policing tidy up all day long. I know I certainly don't. So I find that really building pride in our community and allowing students to take the lead in creating our space means that they have a vested interest in taking care of it. It's that, you know, they want to help tidy. They want to make our class look great because it's a place that they feel belongs to them. And hopefully it's a place that they're proud of. As well, in the community, differences are celebrated, and that's important. When students feel confident about who they are as a human being and as a learner, it can, you know, trickle down to the academics. So if they see themselves as a capable member of our community, when they do start, you know, developmentally reading, to give the example that we just talked about on the last slide, they have this confidence, and it really pays off. So that's another reason why I feel community is important. And this has come up a lot in the chat, the idea of safety. When students feel valued, safe, and supported, they're comfortable making mistakes. They can take risks in their learning, and that's, you know, when we see the piece about a growth mindset. So to me, community is not just something we say, it's not just something we do. It does affect our learning, our confidence, our self-image. And to me, that's a huge reason why belonging and contributing is now one of the 4 frames we're talking about. There's some real payoffs to talking about community in the early years. I'll let you read this quote yourself. This came from an article on classroom communities. It will be linked at the end of the presentation, but I thought it did a really nice job of clarifying why this is important and giving us context. If you want to read it and then give me the green check mark that Mally showed us to let me know you finished reading, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Awesome. I'm seeing lots of check marks, which is leading me to believe most of us are towards the end of it. I love this piece. And Jenny, you took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say the only thing I would change is that last part, doing it in the first month of school. It's absolutely important in that first month and in the second month and in the third. And it's that idea that we're not just building community, but really cultivating it as the year goes on. You know, we're all early years educators. We know that often after the holiday break or March break, students come back and we need to really go back to the basics of what is a community. So I'm happy that came up in the chat because that's a piece, as much as I love this quote, I always think about that. You know, it's not just first month, it's all year long. And, you know, sometimes groups need more than others. Our class dynamics change year to year, and it's one of the most fascinating things about what we do. I've alluded to this throughout the night, but it's important to say that community is important because now it's officially part of what we do in our kindergarten program. That brand new 2016 document that I certainly love so much. My hard copy of it is well used, it's ripping apart. And I'm a big fan of our new kindergarten program. One of my favorite things to do when I do in-person presentations is to actually show our old curriculum document side by side to the new program document. And I point out the difference in thickness. Our old one is much thinner. This one is quite thicker. And to me, that speaks a great deal to the amount of research that roots what we do. We're not just doing play-based learning and student-led inquiry and community building simply because it sounds good. But that front matter of our new Ontario kindergarten program really shows us the research behind why we're doing and the very real benefits it has to students, to their families, and to us as educators. I do a lot of tweeting, and often I will tweet out certain graphics or charts from the program document, and it's neat because educators around the world will reply and say, oh, what book is this from? This looks so great. And I'm able to say, this is actually the Ontario kindergarten program. I'm quite a big fan of it. So as we know, there is 4 frames of learning, one of which is belonging and contributing. And this frame encompasses children's learning and development with respect to their sense of connectedness to others, their relationship with others, and their contributions as part of a group, a community, and the natural world, and their understanding of relationships and community and of the ways in which people contribute to the world around them. So we can now excitedly say, community building is part of our program. It's what we do, and there's some very real importance behind that. It's impossible to talk about classroom communities without talking about the role of relationships, because to me, you can't have one without the other. In fact, I believe classroom communities are built on these relationships. And I listed a few I thought of, so student-to-educator relationships, student-to-student relationships, student-to-classroom, their relationship to the physical space and the materials around them, educator-to-educator relationships. One of the joys of kindergarten is that we get to work in educator teams, and really cultivating a positive relationship has a massive effect on our communities. And lastly, but certainly not least, I mentioned the school-to-family relationship. And we need to make time for this. I'll let you have a read of that quote that comes straight out of the kindergarten program about the role of relationships and why it's important in community building. To me, it's this idea that relationships aren't an afterthought, but they are really at the forefront of what we do. And they help us build that strong foundation that allows for all the fabulous things to happen and to follow. Another resource I love, and again, this will be linked towards the end of the presentation and links will be emailed out to you, is a book called Beyond Behavior Management. And it's a really proactive and positive approach to behavior management that's rooted in the idea of community building. And the author says, we want children to become happy and productive members of society. One of the stepping stones towards this goal is for children to identify themselves as members of a larger group. This is kindergarten. For young children in our care, that translates into being an important and useful member of our classroom community. Many children need help to make the developmental step from thinking the world revolves around them to identifying themselves as part of a larger group. And that's not a negative comment. For those of us, when we think about child development, we know that when they enter kindergarten, they are more egocentric. That's developmentally where they are at. And as kindergarten educators, we get to witness what happens when we have, for me, 31 students come into this space and really navigate their relationships with each other and with school and with us. Just out of sheer curiosity in the chat, if you are a kindergarten educator, do you want to share class sizes? How many do we have this year? Jenny, you win so far, 32. 28. Shannon's got 10, so she's on her own, is my guess. Oh, wow, Stephanie B, 20 JKs and 10 SKs. Love it. So quite varied. Oh, neat, Stacy, very neat. It's always so fascinating just to see, what everyone's got in all different places. But what I love is whether you're a class of 30 or a small class where perhaps it's just you as a sole educator, the role of relationships is exactly the same levels of importance regardless of our class size. This last quote, when we think about relationships, I've used this in presentations before, and it always gets a pretty strong reaction when I do in person. I see a lot of nods or mm-hmm. So I'm hoping we can respond to it in the chat. It comes from a TED Talk that I love. It's going to be linked as well. It's called Every Kid Needs a Champion. And if you have not seen it, if you take one thing from tonight's presentation, please, 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 please watch it. It's fascinating. It's inspiring. It's meaningful. I have no doubt that you'll all connect with it. And it's that your toughest kids are never absent, never. The tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection. It's the relationships. Let's respond in the chat. I love that, Patricia. Yeah, to me, it further speaks to that idea of why this is important for all of our students, for those tough kids that, Rita Pearson's talking about in this quote. Jean Clinton, absolutely, that idea about a caring adult in the school. We're currently working through that at our school, actually, during our PLC sessions. It's a topic that we've been talking about a lot lately. I think it's important, the tiring piece. Patricia, we have to be realistic and we have to be honest about the things that we're experiencing in the field. And what I would say to that is when we build strong classrooms communities, it often removes us as educators from being the sole one who kind of provides that behavior management or provides that support. When we're really building a strong classroom community, all of the students are stepping up and taking the lead on supporting each other, on helping each other, on listening to each other, on solving problems with each other. And even though they are tiring, absolutely, it's really a huge part of what we do, and it's that rewarding piece. Awesome. Thank you all for contributing in the chat. I really appreciate it. Candy, absolutely. They celebrate each other's successes in a classroom community. And they recognize each other's mistakes too. And for us in our community, one thing we are always saying, one of our kind of go-to lines is, it's okay to make mistakes. And I tell them all the time, kids make mistakes, grown-ups make mistakes. Often, if I'm writing a message and I make a mistake, I show them, I highlight it. And I share with them, I made a mistake. I don't feel upset. This is how I learn. So it's nice to hear them start to repeat those messages to each other. I'm going to flip ahead, and we're going to move into the portion of the presentation where we're going to look at some practical strategies for building community. I think up until now, we've really defined what a community is and hopefully clarified why it's important. But I know from being on the other end of this when I'm looking at presentations that the theory is important, but often what I'm looking for are practical in-classroom strategies. So I will be sharing some examples from my own practice. Again, this is just what has worked for me. with my students at my school. And I do want to say again, it's not a step-by-step expert guide on how to build community. There is no such thing. It's simply what has worked for me. Perhaps you will take 1, 2 part of it, you'll adapt it to work for your unique students, because it's important to remember that a community, every community is different. What happens in our classroom community is drastically different from what happens in your classroom community, just because of the unique nature of all of our students. The first strategy I want to talk about is the use of intentional language. And perhaps you've already heard it tonight. I try very hard to actually say community instead of classroom. And I try very, very hard to say we instead of me or I. So it's very rare that I slip up and say my classroom. And that's something that I have intentionally and purposefully moved away from, because it goes against the idea of a community. Although it's a slight shift in words, I put it first because I feel very strongly that language is so powerful. And I can call it a community, but if I'm saying me, I, and my partner, you know, the early child educator in the room who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, isn't part of that me or that I, then I'm going against the idea of community. And it also cuts out our students. If I say my classroom, well, it's not my classroom. It's our space. It belongs to all of us. Language is so powerful. And I tell the students all the time, you know, this is not my classroom. I'm not the boss. This classroom belongs to all of us. And when students really feel that and believe that, it has such a powerful effect in strengthening that community feel. Another piece of language that I've looked very carefully at during my learning journey is expectations versus rules. So instead of saying, you know, our classroom rules, which tend to be framed in the negative, no running, no hitting, I tried to purposely shift it and flip it to expectations. Well, what are we expected to do in this community? And I find that that tends to put it in the positive rather than the negative of no, no, no. It becomes, you know, we think about safety. We treat our learning materials gently. We listen to each other. Yeah, Patricia, responsibilities. I like that too. You'll see later in one of the slides I talk about classroom jobs, and I used to say jobs, and I've shifted just this year to saying responsibilities. That's been a change in my own learning. I just feel it's a better connotation. So I don't know if you can tell from the image, but this is our classroom door this year. This is what it looks like this year. And I think doors are really powerful. I talk about language being powerful, but also to me, a door is so symbolic. It's kind of the entryway into this community. And I feel like it says a lot about what lies within. So the images you see are on the outside are our September self-portraits. We do a monthly self-portrait. And I thought, why not put everyone's self-portrait on the door and really show that this is their space? At the top section, I have a educational quote that I love, and I read it every morning when I open the door and every day when I close the door, and it really grounds me and reminds me what we're there for. And in the middle section, that's a sign actually that one of our students made this year. It says, "We are room 109, we are a community." And this came from them, and it just really was something I wanted to include on our door this year because I think it says a lot about what lies within. So we consider our use of language. This strategy here, I have to be honest with you, it's not groundbreaking, it's not rocket science, but I think it's important to mention. We have to make time in the day for building community. If we don't do that, it may not happen, or it may not happen to the same degree. So communities sit together. We share our ideas, our opinions. We both speak and we listen. It's this idea that building relationships takes time, and we have to be willing to take time in our day for that. Now, as early year educators, we all know that sometimes there's not a lot of time in a day, or we have 10 or 11 things going on at one time, or something happens across the room and we have to pivot and change our direction. That's the reality of kindergarten, but I do think if we are committed to building strong, respectful, safe, and meaningful classroom communities, we have to take time for it. I know that in recent years, there's been a shift away from whole group learning in kindergarten, and that's for good reason. We know developmentally, students can't sit for long, extended periods of time, nor should they be expected to. So community meeting doesn't have to be long. It always doesn't even have to have a specific literacy or mathematics focus. That being said, often ours do. We'll embed some literacy, we'll embed some numeracy into it. But sometimes, as you see in this picture, we sit around in a circle and we talk about our weekends. I love Tracy, I love that lunch. And yeah, Natalia, us as well, no matter what's going on the day, we start and end our day with a community meeting. And while I do understand the shift away from long, academic-focused group meetings in kindergarten, I really think there is a role for some whole group learning when it's framed as community building. A specific strategy I wanted to highlight tonight is the idea of a community agreement. And this kind of feeds into what we were talking about earlier about the difference between rules and expectations or responsibilities. To me, it's a proactive approach to classroom management. The process is student-led and it's more expectation-focused, as we said. It allows us to clarify, what does a community do? I had a group last year that I found really would buy into the idea of calling ourselves a community. They would say it a lot, we are a community, we are a community. But a prompt that I often challenge our students with is, don't just say it, show it. And I found with this group last year specifically, we really needed to unpack, well, how do we show we're a community? What does a community do? It's easy to say it, but what does that mean? So we put together a community agreement that you'll see on the next slide. And the nice thing about that is it can be revisited throughout the year. And I would actually change that to say throughout the 2-year program, because the joy of this community agreement that we put together last year, the students who were in year 1 at the time are now year 2 students in the class. And in fact, I had them teach their community about it. They took the lead at one of our meetings, and they showed this agreement to the new students in our community. And it keeps us all accountable. We can revisit it if something happens that maybe goes against what our community believes in, what we've agreed on. We can sit in the circle and talk about it. And that keeps us all accountable, and teachers and students. We're all in this together. So this here is our current community agreement. Like I said, it was put together by our students last year, but there is some overlap with the year 1, year 2 students. So they were excited to share it with our group this year. And when I asked them, what does the community do? They said, we show respect to our community. We help each other if someone needs help. We keep each other safe. We make decisions about our community together. That's the piece that belongs to all of us. I'm not the boss. And this last one I didn't anticipate, but I love this. We never stop learning new things. Great question, Shannon. This was done about halfway through the school year. So up until now, we had talked about these ideas. We hadn't put them into writing yet, but it was neat because we had talked about the idea. We always start with respect. We talked about being helpful. We talked about safety. I'm sure you all know is a big one in kindergarten. So I liked this. It was nice to have those ideas reflected back to us. I almost used it as an assessment of, okay, well, what ideas are really taking hold? What ideas can students articulate? What resonates with them? Yes, so then we did the fingerprints around the edge. We used Crayola multicultural markers, and we encouraged students to find their own skin tone, and they put their fingerprint. So another question, when did we do it? This was done about halfway through the year, and it was done after spending a great deal of time talking about it. You know, we talk about how this happens year-round. I will tell you, our September and October is largely focused on this. There's other stuff going on, of course, but really this, I will say, we do a lot of at the start of the year. Vanessa, how did you prompt them? So the prompt you're seeing is exactly what I asked. They told me we are a community, and I asked them, what does a community do? Again, this wasn't done the first week of school. There had to be a lot of experiential learning and teaching about what a community does. But I found that when the students repeated it back to me and I put it on the wall with their voices, it really allowed us to have something to tether our choices to. Be kind, be safe, and always do your best. I love that, Sherry. So I mentioned that this was done with our students last year, and they brought it forward this year, which was really neat to see. Something new that happened this year with our group was the creation of this community banner. I challenged them to think about what are the big ideas in our community. And at the back of this image, you can see some documentation panels where I went a little more in depth with the process. But I asked them, what are the big ideas in this community? And I explained that as, if someone were to come into our community, what do we want them to know about us and about the space they're in? Now, on the last slide, you see we make decisions about our community together. So I think it's important to mention that I didn't select these. These were garnered through community conversation. We sat in a circle, we listened to everyone's ideas, and they ended up voting on which one they wanted. And what was neat, really neat that I found, and again, didn't expect, is I thought they would vote and pick the one with the top vote. But they decided, well, we actually want to use all three because they're all important and we want everyone's ideas. And that was a nice kind of furthering the community piece. So their big ideas they highlighted were be kind, never give up, and never stop learning. And again, this is something we reference. If someone is perhaps making a choice that's unkind, instead of policing their behavior, instead of an arbitrary timeout or visit to the office, we bring them to look at the big ideas banner. And we have a very real conversation with that student of, well, do you think the choices you're making represent our big ideas? Another strategy we think about is the idea of honoring student voice. And I've alluded to this a bit. If we as the educators are kind of the boss in the classroom or the dominant voice, we're going against the idea of community because our community is made up of everyone in our space, and we have to make sure we're providing students the chance to build these relationships together without us always interfering. So you're seeing in the image here, this is the talk it out table. This is something we tried for the first time a few years back. We had a group that was really quick to say sorry. And as we all know, saying sorry is a nice thing to do, but often it doesn't truly solve a problem, and that's okay, right? I think when we just kind of quickly forced students in our community to say sorry just because, we really rob them of the valuable learning that comes when we talk through a problem. And when we as educators take it upon ourselves to always be the ones to solve the problem, we're not giving students the chance to build relationships with each other. So even in these difficult moments, they're building relationships. So we put out the talk it out table. I have to mention it was, heavily modeled at the start. I didn't just put it out. My teaching partner at the time, Sheila, and myself would do a lot of role playing, and the students really bought into it, where we would kind of recreate something that might happen in play, and we would visit the talk it out table together. There are no real rules at the talk it out table. The only thing we said is when the other person is listening, or when the other person is speaking rather, delivering their message, it's important that you listen and wait until they're done to respond. But we both have a say at the talk it out table. What I found about this was often removing students from the physical location where the problem or incident may have occurred was enough to help them calm down. They would physically leave the space, and the talk it out table was often on the other end of the room, because I don't know about you, but often our conflicts were arising at the block area. And I would be close. I didn't want to interject. I didn't want to rob them of the learning, but I would kind of hover to observe how they did, and it really blew me away how students were able to really talk about their problems and move away from just that kind of band-aid solution of, I'm sorry. So this was something that we put into place that really helped build community between students. It's not always student to educator. We really have to give them the chance to build relationships together, and giving them a voice in this has been so powerful. Another way we try to encourage students to contribute their voice is the idea of a talking stick or a talking block. This year, and every group's different. This year our group has really latched onto the idea of talk block. They love that it rhymes. They're always getting the talk block during our community meetings, and we pass it around the circle. You see here one year they were really into a stick, and this was a nice idea. We had every student come and choose a decoration to add to it. So hot glue gun used by an educator, but the students selected the material they wanted, and they also chose where on the stick they wanted it. And it was kind of a nice visual reminder that we all are different parts that make up one community. And we also have to believe that students are capable of solving their own problems, of having voice, of building their own relationships. This is an image that I captured in our classroom probably only a week ago. And for a little bit of context, the student who's sitting at the table, he was working on drawing a bat. Our students are building a cave right now. It's this huge inquiry they're taking part in. And on the iPad, we pulled up an image of a bat, and he was making multiple attempts to draw the bat. I believe this is attempt number 3, and he was getting really frustrated. He was actually crumpling up his papers, throwing them. He was feeling frustrated, which is a natural reaction for children and adults. But the second child you see, the boy in blue, he, without any prompting from an educator, went to go get one of our self-regulation tools from an area of the classroom we call the quiet corner. So the tool he's using is we call it the breathing ball. The students have chosen the name, but it's a ball that goes in and out, and when it expands and contracts, it reminds us to take deep breaths. And what I loved about this image was this student noticed one of his community members was upset, and he took it upon himself to offer help. And I think if we as educators are always swooping in to solve these problems, we rob the students of this relationship building between student to student. And I shared this image with the classroom, and we used it as a teachable moment on how we can support each other. And to me, that really speaks to being a community. We help each other. That goes back to the community agreement. We help each other when they need it. And it's not always the teacher who gives help. Students can help students, and students can help teachers. Yeah, Patricia, Quiet Corner is an interesting one. What do you need when you get there? That's where we're at with them. And I find that for the specific tools, we use a sparkle jar, for example. It comes from the Minds Up curriculum, which has been really helpful for us. We do a lot of, again, role-playing, modeling. The joy of a 2-year program is that student-to-student scaffolding. So students who recognize the self-regulation tool can be the ones who take the lead on teaching their new peers about it. But we just actually created some documentation panels for our student this year on how do we use these self-regulation tools, and we photograph students using them, and we use student voice of them explaining how it's used. So that's been helpful for us. I've mentioned student-led inquiry, and it's really at the forefront of what's happening in the kindergarten program right now, and I think it's such a valuable and meaningful way to build a learning community. So giving students opportunities to take the lead in these interest-driven inquiry projects is a natural and authentic way to build their relationships with each other when they work towards a common goal. The example I want to show you came from, I believe this was 2 or 3 years ago in our kindergarten community. And it was at the time when the Blue Jays had got into the World Series. I'm not a major baseball expert by any means, but it was my understanding that this doesn't happen a lot. So being in Toronto where we are, Blue Jays fever was kind of at an all-time high. And I found that students were coming to school every day talking about the Blue Jays. And it became apparent that they were paying close attention, and they were watching the news, watching the games. They knew a lot of what was going on. So I thought, This interest is so high. How can we use this in our learning community to really kickstart something meaningful? So we decided as a community to build our own Rogers Center in room 109 kindergarten. As you can see in the images at the top, it started with some research. We got some books from the library. YouTube was super valuable. Something's happened on my screen. Oh, it's back now. Can we all see the slides? We had a brief moment there. Oh, we can see the slides. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. We used the laptop actually to find, we found a time-lapse video of the Sky Dome being built, and the students were fascinated. They would watch it over and over and over, and I was documenting their conversations to kind of pull reoccurring themes or wonders. From there, we moved to the idea of making blueprints and moving into the construction phase. So families sent in materials. You can see here, what I love about the inquiry model is when students are taking the lead on their own inquiry and large-scale projects, and there's entry points for all students. So you see here at our classroom art studio, students were painting the dome roof. Over here, they're measuring. This is the ground, so there's mathematics coming into it. These were actually maps from our reading corner that they brought over because they thought it looked like the grass in a baseball field. The project went on and they created bases. One of our students, whose mom is actually a costume designer, created this mascot head with a blue jay that the students would wear. Our phys ed teacher shared some of these pennies with us. And students were bringing things from home. So it really connected our families and our larger community. You know, someone brought in their baseball glove, or students who had been to the game and got the rally towels, brought them in. You see on the bottom, this is concessions. These were the drinks that they were selling in the stands. And there's binoculars if you want to watch the game. And what resulted was the Rogers Center in room 109. But what I love about inquiry and the project approach specifically is that it's not even about the final product. It's that process that the students go through together that really makes the learning so meaningful. And why I chose this specific example and how it might relate to the idea of community is that if I simply stopped at listening to the fact that students were interested in the Blue Jays, I could have stayed late at school one night. I could have spent 2 or 3 hours building a Rogers Center on my own and saying, go ahead, go play in it. But it's that process that this learning community went through together that was so meaningful. It really, truly brought them together as a community. They were working towards a common goal, and they found places for everyone. You know, whether it was a creative art piece, you know, writing on the Jumbotron and the scoreboards. These were the gates, gate 1, gate 2, and students made tickets. It's this idea that when we allow students to take the lead on a student-led inquiry and large-scale projects, simply the act of doing that strengthens the bonds within our community. And they become so proud and they have ownership. You know, we spoke about tidy up earlier. When we're really highlighting community, you better believe they wanted to keep the Rogers Center tidy. You know, they were taking such great care of it because they understood how much work had gone into the process of creating it. And what was really fun was it became a fully functional dramatic center. So you can see here, they're playing Blue Jays. They had a bat that they made out of cardboard and a softball from the gym. You can see there's spectators in the stands. And I distinctly remember this day. This was, we called it the grand opening, and we made popcorn. And, you know, the energy in the room was electric. And to me, this is a learning community, you know, and we know this in the early years. Learning is active. Learning is tied to our emotions. It's not sitting in desks in a row, filling out a worksheet. And that's why I love that the kindergarten program understands the benefits of an inquiry stance in our education. So that's the specific strategy I wanted to highlight. as we talk about building and strengthening our classroom communities. Something else that I want to talk about briefly, and has come up a lot too, is the idea that we're co-creating this physical space. And you've heard me say many times tonight, you know, who does this classroom belong to? It's not my classroom. This community belongs to all of us. And if I'm going to say that, I have to show it through the choices I make. I love this quote from Malaguzzi. It has been said that the environment should act as a kind of aquarium, which reflects the ideas, ethics, attitudes, and cultures of the people who live in it. This is what we are working towards. So it's this idea that I'm not coming in, you know, at the end of August and fully plastering our walls with things that I've chosen. Of course, I'm going in and doing classroom setup, but as you'll see in some of the photos that follow, we really try to start as much as possible with a blank slate, and that we allow the students and their unique identities, their backgrounds, their culture, their wonders, their thoughts, to be what really fill up our space. And it's that idea that through co-creating the physical space, we are not only just saying to students, but really showing them, this is your community. This space belongs to all of us. This is a tradition in our classroom community. It's the Room 109 name banner, and we start every year coming together and making a name banner. Not only does it allow us a nice entryway into the idea of literacy, letter recognition, name recognition, but for me, it's a real physical reminder that we are a community. We create this all together, and we put it on our wall. It's the first big thing we see in our class, and it's a visual reminder every day that we are one. We all come together to create this community. And I love this image too, because this is actually, we made it on the floor and our caretakers hung it up overnight. And this is as students came into school that day, they noticed it was hung up and they ran right over with their backpacks on. But when we're involving them in creating our space, they get so excited about it. I also chose this image because you can see in the background a lot of blank space. And as I said, we are purposeful to start our room as much as possible as a blank space. Yeah, Patricia. Yeah, and the caretakers are part of the community. So after this happened, we sat down as a class and we wrote them a letter to thank them for hanging up our banner for us, because they are community members as well, and we're thankful for the help that they give us. You'll see here some examples of how our space fills up with student work and student voice as the year goes on, starting from that blank slate. So at a writing table and at a math area, we have students creating visuals for letters and numbers. Of course, you see that we put some as well, but the fact that they take ownership over creating their own shows that they're confident in their learning. This was one year someone wrote, this is room 109, and actually drew specific students in the class. So we thought, let's put that up. And this happened this year. I really like this message. He said, I made a message. It says, take care of our materials, treat the materials nicely, care and love. And this is actually hanging up on our wall. So the idea is that I'm selecting a bunch of store-bought posters or pre-made visuals that our students don't really have a lot of connections to, and putting those things on the walls, they often become background because our students aren't really tuned into why they're there. Something that I try to imagine every year in our space is if a visitor were to come into our classroom, it's my hope that our students, any of our students, would be able to give that person a tour of our space, and they would be able to tell them everything that's on the wall, but also why is it there? What's the context? Why did we create this together and put this up on the wall? Here's a few more examples. The images you see along the top are our morning routine. So this was something we did in September. We photographed the morning routine, and we used student voice to write what each step was. We have the community jobs. I've now changed my own thinking. I call it community responsibilities, and a show and share board. But this is all student created. And the idea of co-creating your physical space is so important if we're going to be building strong communities and encouraging students to think about themselves as contributing members of those communities. You know, we think about the frame belonging and contributing. And when students are in charge of what goes on our walls, it's my belief that they belong through the act of contributing. Every student has a work in progress area. This has been really helpful for them to have kind of their own space. If they're in the middle of working on something, they can put it there when it comes time for tidy up. We all have special rocks we collected on the beach. So it gives them a space that belongs to them. You can see some of them are really getting into decorating it this year. This is neat. Yeah, this is like an old school shelf that I think used to be used for indoor shoes to store cubbies. But we could get creative. We could use shoe boxes. Everyone brings in a shoe box from home and we line them up. I love this example. This was a student. All this work you see here, he created all of it. And he would ask us, can you put this on the wall? And it led to this idea of mark making as an entryway of writing. But I just love this idea. The fact that he pinned these up shows that he really understands that this is his space. And to me, the idea of co-creating the physical space is so important in building communities. And we revisit the documentation that's on our wall. This is from this year. We started with a name inquiry where we had them tell us about your name. And not only was it helpful for literacy, but it gave us a chance to talk about our students' unique identities and how that makes up a community. But I love this because this happened again just maybe last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. The student noticed that he didn't put an S in his name when he wrote it way back in September. And he says, well, now I'm older. Now I'm in kindergarten and I know how to do it. So it's nice that when their work is on the walls, they reference that documentation. And it's all a cycle. They come back to it. And I don't think this would have happened if I just put up some sort of alphabet poster that I bought at a store. The final strategy I want to talk about, and I think you can't talk about community without recognizing that we as a classroom are part of a larger community, and that involves our families, but also the community supports around us. So some ways that we've involved families, one year we made these color panels. We noticed that our students really needed some more visuals for sight words for colors. They were struggling with that, and we wanted to set them up for success. But we had all the students take this home, and we encouraged students, families, to write in their home language. And just like we put the English sight words on our wall, we had the languages that were reflective of our community makeup, so Mandarin, Japanese, Russian, and Korean. And I was very clear with them of, I'm not the expert. You know, I'm not going to Google how do we write red in Russian, you know, when we have experts in our family communities. And the families were really excited about this. I remember when they came for interviews that year, they were really proud to see them on the walls. So it's important to make sure that when we talk about communities, it's not just student-teacher, that families are a huge part of this. And I think the Ontario Kindergarten Program does a really good job of highlighting that. Oh, Shannon, I love that. I love that, the idea that the parents are contributing to a number wall. We're in the process of designing our number wall right now, so I may be inspired by you. Thank you for that. And this last piece you see here on the right was inspired by the book Last Stop on Market Street. It's a fabulous read aloud. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend checking it out. But it mentions food banks, and as a class, we talked about, well, what is a food bank? Who might use a food bank? Why might it be important to our larger community? And the students took it upon themselves to write a letter to their families about what a food bank is. And again, students take the lead in inquiry. I could have written a letter to the families we want to collect for the food bank, but the students took the lead. I scribed, they signed their names at the bottom. They made a sign here, food for the food bank. And allowing students to take the lead really strengthens this idea of community. So a quick recap, because I know that was a lot of information. It's my hope that it was helpful, at least one or two things maybe resonated with you that you could take back to your own classroom communities to try. The strategies I highlighted tonight were the use of intentional language, the idea that we need to actually make time to come together as a group, as a community, talking and listening, creating and referencing community agreements, cultivating and making space for student voice, the idea of student-led inquiry as a means of building community, the importance of co-creating the physical space, that the students see themselves reflected on the walls, And lastly, but definitely not least, involving families and the larger community. So that's me, and I've seen it a bit in the chat, and I'm thankful for it. But I want to hear from you. What other strategies have you used to build community in your space? And like we did earlier in the presentation, you can use the text boxes like this to add your ideas straight to the screen. And the idea is that together, we as a learning community will share our knowledge and create a little bit of some living documentation of ways that we've created community. I'm looking forward to hearing what you do in your space. Candy, I love that idea of the expert wall. I will certainly be inspired by you. That's great. Visitors into the class. And seeing a few ideas here about literacy and read-alouds, and absolutely, I agree. Read-alouds are so powerful for unpacking these big ideas of what community is. I know I got a lot of questions earlier on the community agreement and what point in the year that came. That came, midway through the year, but also after many read-alouds that focus on respect, that focus on kindness, that focus on responsibility, that focus on safety. There's so many rich read-alouds out there that'll really bring these big ideas into a meaningful place for our young students. Expert of the day, rock star of the day. Oh, that's a new one for me. I like that. And that, again, that is the idea that students have voice in our space. We always say, I'm not the only teacher. Everyone in our community is a teacher, and everyone in our community is a student. And again, that language is so powerful. Lots of great ideas here about engaging families. Lots of great examples too about how students can help in the class. So doing the recycling, or over here I see, ringing the bell and letting them know when it's time to go. If we as the educators are always the ones who are saying 5 more minutes or time to tidy up, even though we say we're not the boss, we're showing that we are. And when we have the students take the lead on these logistical, transitions throughout the day, we're really practicing what we preach with community. So those are great points. Thank you for sharing those. For those still typing, I'm going to give about 2 more minutes just so we can get all the thoughts out there, but I'm really enjoying reading your ideas, your strategies. I'm finding them inspiring. I definitely am on my notepad beside me jotting down some ideas that I want to try tomorrow in the classroom. Multiple language greetings are a fabulous idea, and we do it too every morning. And we have the students who speak another language at home of how do you say hello in your language? And they stand up and they teach us. And we greet each other in those languages almost every day, which is, a community honors the differences. Oh, community feast. I love that. What a great idea. I think what tonight is showing, through the examples I shared, but also through the examples that you all are sharing now, is there's not one way to build community. There's not a right way or a wrong way. And like I said earlier, it's not a step-by-step guide. But what I'm really feeling as I read all these awesome examples is that there's so many ways to do it. And we as educators, when we think back to the beginning of this presentation where we clarified why is community important? Why do we build relationships? When we really deeply understand that, as I can tell we do, we will highlight 101 ways to build that community because we understand the very real positive effects it has on all of our learners. And I think as long as we are making an effort every day to create and cultivate community that is safe, caring, respectful, and what I love about kindergarten is when they love to come to school, they love to learn, they walk in with a smile on their face. I think, and I know that that is something our young students will take with them throughout their school, throughout every grade. If they can look at themselves as a positive contributing member of a learning community, it's my hope that it goes all the way up. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts tonight. It was really meaningful. Before we wrap up, I'm hoping to, in the chat, hear one thing you may take from tonight's learning. That's just helpful for me as a new presenter of webinars. It's nice to know when things resonate. And on the flip side, if there's one thing you still wonder about, if there's something perhaps I didn't cover tonight, I do want to hear that because it's hopefully something I can reflect on as a learner and as a presenter. But it's my hope that we found tonight meaningful and enjoyable. A community meeting at the end of the day. I like it. It kind of just gives them a chance to regroup at the end of the day. I'll say, and I know that you all know this, is often energy at the end of the day can be tricky. So our community meetings at the end of the day are very short. The focus is usually tell us what you did today, show us what you learned today. It kind of takes on a more show and share feel. But I like the idea of regrouping at the end of the day together like we did at the start of the day. Thank you, Stacy. I'm glad it was informative. Thank you. The community agreement, yeah, it's something that has been really helpful for us. And it kind of prevents me from playing the role of police officer, which I don't want to do. To me, that's not what a community is about. We all are responsible for ourselves and our choices, and the agreement has been really helpful for revisiting that as the year goes on. Better late than never. Of course, Vanessa. I think that's such an important point, This can and should happen year-round. It happens in June. Great point over here on the wondering side. I want to highlight this because I think it's important. The reality is for those of us with very large groups, it can be difficult to do in the whole group. And I'm so happy that, thank you to whoever wrote this. I love the mention of doing it in smaller groups. I think that's so important to recognize that, there is a sense of importance for whole group, and hopefully I touch on that tonight. But some of the real explicit learning pieces where we dig into these ideas are so much more achievable in a small group built into our learning space time. That's a great point. Thank you for making that. For sure, and this is a really great wonder. The inclusion piece, I see it up there as well. The ideas of strategies for building community when some of our students have their own needs. certainly something to keep thinking about. Great point, Tracy. That's very difficult, you know, and our messaging when educators leave and also when students leave, because we've had students move or come, is that communities are fluid, communities are flexible, people come and people go, but we've used it as to kind of highlight that a community isn't just who's in our physical space. You know, if we had a student in our community who moved away, they're still part of our community, whether they're with us or halfway around the world. And there's ways to continue cultivating those connections. For those still typing, I'm going to give about a minute and a half. I want to make sure we all get our thoughts out. I'm finding it very meaningful to hear what resonated, what you're taking, but even more so what you're still wondering and where we can all continue to keep thinking. You know, we're all still always learning. As I said, there's no experts. I love this point here. I think that's a really nice ending reflection. This idea that it's important to intentionally make time to build these relationships. It doesn't happen on its own, but I firmly believe, and it's my hope that you would also agree, that it's such a huge investment in our time together in a kindergarten classroom to really invest time and energy into building that strong, caring foundation. So many great things can happen when that is at the core of what we do. Before I head out for the night, I do want to thank all of you. I started by saying it's my hope it's a dialogue. I don't want to talk for an hour and a half. And I really am so thankful to have seen so many great ideas in the chat, also on the screen when we've been typing. Mali and I were saying before we started that typically the kindergarten webinars are known for being the most talkative and helpful in cultivating that dialogue. So you guys definitely lived up to that. Thank you so much. It means a lot as a presenter when I can hear from you as well, because we all learn from each other. I've listed a few resources that have been helpful for me in my learning journey. We, of course, definitely think the kindergarten program is a huge one. I love it. There's the Beyond Behavior Management, the book I mentioned. I threw Stuart Shanker in there because self-regulation is huge in our communities. This article here, Consider the Walls, thank you, Mali, there's the links. Consider the Walls is an article I read every August and September as we think about classroom setup and co-creating that with our students. And it's been so helpful for me in that idea of shifting away from pre-made cartoon borders and towards a student-created physical space. So if you haven't seen that one, I would highly recommend it. This was the article I referenced right off the top. And yes, let's all watch this TED Talk. Even if you've seen it before, I watch it all the time. It's a real motivator and a real boost. For those who want to be in touch, I am on Twitter. I tweet as Joel Seaman, and it's been a fabulous tool to connect with other educators, to see what else is going on out there. It's been a real helpful learning tool. We also tweet from our kindergarten account, IPS Kindergarten. It's allowed us to share with our learning community, families, what we're doing in the classroom. It's shared between 3 awesome classrooms. When you see hashtag room 109, that's us, but everything on there is really interesting if you want to take a look. And I do love to talk about kindergarten, so I actually started a blog where I can kind of go a little more in depth around my evolving philosophy on education. That is pretty much it for me. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. I know I enjoyed the learning, and I'm hopeful that you did too. Molly, thank you as well for all your help.
And thanks, Joel, for really great.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
webinar, and definitely the participants did not disappoint. I knew that everyone would be chatty. There was so much to talk about and so much learning and so much sharing, so thanks everyone. Just want to do a couple of, not announcements, but things that we would love for you to participate in. One of them is when you log out of the webinar tonight, it will direct you to a link that will direct you to a link for a survey. And if you could complete that, it serves three purposes. One is to provide feedback to Joel, and the next is to provide feedback to OTF and also the Ministry of Education, who funds the program. So we'd really appreciate that if you could fill that in.